Out of the Hallow, Book 1 in the Hallow series, by J.W. Xitt, Chapter 6, Deceitful Scars.
Take off your boots, warrior Eddipus. You're moving on my holy realm.
Yes, Goddess Onaveeve. He removed his boots and felt the dark, cold stone path beneath his feet. He stared at the blackened stonework walls ahead of them.
By taking them off, you're leaving behind your identity, a little bit of yourself. When approaching the divine, you don't need boots or tools. You sense the dimension you're in.
She paused, smiling at Eddipus with a sinful sneer.
And be with your goddess.
She lingered on the phrase. He bowed his head, closing his eyes, not looking at Onaveeve. He wanted to show respect. He feared the Eternal. Clanmaster Dante taught when approaching the Lord's dimension to not use all six senses, but Elven warrior Eddipus was being deceived. He and Val had spent 40 days and 40 nights in their travels thus far. Oedipus had never felt the temptation or deception of pure evil incarnate.
Welcome to my lair.
She placed a hand on his arm.
Land of the dead, my home eternal in the north.
He saw the stonework on a dark, small keep.
If you are a true warrior of dread, climb my tall castle walls.
Oedipus had become tired. Half their rations were gone, and when they woke in the realm of the north, it was like they never ate at all. Onaveeve was trying to goad him into using his feats of strength. She wanted to watch him for entertainment purposes. He might have felt fatigued, but he didn't stop. "One moment, my lady. I can climb your walls alone with my bare hands." He began to scale the wall, clutching to each crack, cranny, and crease. By the time Eddipus had reached the top of the spire, he became exasperated. He turned and leapt to the roof, only to see Onaveeve looking at him with a smile. Then she took him by his rough hands.
Here, this leads to the highest point of my spire. Use the stairs to stand up on the top.
He dared not disobey divinity, so he trudged up the staircase leading to the spire and stood where she told him.
If you are a real warrior elf of the hilltop,
She said,
use your elven strength and throw yourself from my spire. Grab the ledge as you fall out and pull up to your shoulders and chin. Pull up at least 10 times. Prove yourself a true warrior to me.
This was fun for Onaveeve. She enjoyed the control she had over Eddipus. She continued.
I will heal your wounds if you fall.
He answered her. "Why do you test me? Do you doubt me as elvish warrior?"
And do you doubt me? Question me?
She asked, indignant. Finally, the warrior took to the very high ledge. He showed he could best her exasperating challenges as he climbed back.
If you bow down to me, Eddipus,
Her speech slowed.
I will give you all of this.
"What do you mean, miss?" he replied.
I offer you my dominion. You'll have rule over my kingdom. You'll rule beside me.
She caressed Oedipus's hand in a gentle motion, kissing the back of it.
My world can be your world, in exchange for an act of unfaithfulness. Leave your lover and join me in unquestioning loyalty.
She would have the boy's heart and soul, the boy's body and mind. She would tell Valeria Hilda's secret. Valeria would destroy Hilda as soon as she learned the truth. Nyxith only needed to confirm her suspicions. She leaned back in a chair in Sister Lisa's hut, waiting for Hilda to speak. and watched her past the hearth's flame. Her form was now an exact copy of Lisa's. Nyxith hid her smiling mouth behind a small cup of tea. She also hid the real Lisa away. Her heart was pounding. She had a good feeling about what she was about to do. Nyxith would worm Hilda's secret from her. She had been with Vinan secretly, and had pretended to be Hilda. She wanted to see the boy again. She wanted to seek him out, take him in her arms, and make him feel her heart again. Valeria had only promised her the boy prince on a silver platter after Nyxith's task. She would not have to pretend any more. She shook herself from her thoughts. Sister Lisa raised one brow in response to Priestess Hilda sighing with discomfort. I promised I'd tell you who my lover is, and I will, Sister Lisa. Lisa nodded and rested her back against a wicker chair. Lisa suspected it had to be someone she knew. Didymus, his young son, Cimmerius, any number of elven villagers could chain to her Vidian. Telling her in secret within Lisa's heart confirmed her suspicions, but she needed to hear it. She needed a name so she could claim her reward. She felt she definitely had well earned what Valeria promised, especially after having to hide the real Lisa's body away. She was a master manipulator, a changeling, a seer talented in shifting her form. It had not been a charity that brought her to Hilda, but a boy. The witch owed her Prince Vinan's fervor. When Valeria had requested her talents, there had been no regrets in using her gifts. Nyxith was an impostor. She dwelt in the deepest, darkest realms of man's imagination and the thick winds of the air. She had taken Lisa's form while they were in the marketplace. Nyxith had done it so fast. She wondered if Hilda's interest might be a certain warrior off questing for the cure to save a dying magic tree.
If I might be so bold to add, I think I know who's close to your heart. It's the elven warrior Eddipus, isn't it, Priestess Hilda? That's why you've been so secretive about it all.
Yes, Hilda cried.
Lisa, you must not tell a soul any of this. They'd hang me in Eddipus, like some murderous thief in the night. Don't worry at all about your secret. I'll keep it.
Nyxith fit.
Please, Lisa, forget about it. Put it all away from your mind with a lock and key, hidden in darkness.
She replied.
Good. Well, I'll nod off then. Good night.
She stared at Hilda walking over to an iron bed of animal pelts. Nyxith was methodical, calm, calculating, and deadly.
Vinan is mine,
coursed through her mind. Hilda drifted off to sleep. Nyxith reached out and left Lisa as a disintegrated pile of dissolving ash. She traveled beyond the confines of Sister Lisa's hut. Her soul drifted on the winds, past homes, mounts, and trees, until it fell. This was Nyxith's true appearance. Her biggest flaw was that she was void, formless. She could be anyone, but lacked her own original silhouette. In truth, she was nothing more than thoughts and air aflutter in a world of shadow and ominous mystery. Her interest was still in Vinan. The only way she could be with him was to shapeshift as Hilda every night, like she had been. Being formless hadn't disavowed her feelings. Being chained to undefined realities had muddled her mind, but not her heart.
Valeria?
Her thoughts spread out. They had finally fallen to the mind of a beautiful woman who was with a beautiful man. It was traumatic for Eddipus, but he felt self-conscious, insecure, and awkward. Magic does that sometimes. Onaveeve smelled of something sour. A hint of sulphur wafted through the air with a tinge of poisonous, rotting flesh coated in honey. She held his gaze and captivated him with a multitude of words. These words coalesced into an enchantment. Eddipus feared for his life. Then Onaveeve sensed a presence and knew it was Nyxith who had entered her dark domain. It was Nyxith who saw Eddipus. She tried to get Onaveeve's attention.
I know who his love is.
Her voice echoed in Onaveeve's head. She ignored the voice. The entity compassed the area. She laid wait for Onaveeve to finish with Eddipus, who now felt he was losing control. Nyxith hovered at the gates of the castle, silent as the night. This was not an act of love, but an act of evil. It was a selfish act. Eddipus did not even feel himself disrobe. He ran and pressed Onaveeve against a wall with a lover's embrace. "Stop!" he thought, as he lost concentration and tried to fight the spell that she directed against him. The night waned till midnight. The full moon rose and illuminated the doors of the gate to the keep and the 2 posts. The celestial body disappeared from view. Clouds gathered and shrouded the north in dark grey mist. Oedipus's breath felt trapped in his throat, and he found it hard to concentrate. Onaveeve held her gaze fixed on his. Her magic over him grew stronger. He leaned forward and kissed her. Onaveeve's lips tasted bitter, like strong ash, bitter and yet sweet. "Hilda!" His mind and heart cried out. His heart began to beat faster. His breathing became rapid and labored as his muscles tensed. Eddipus shivered, blinking. A feeling of unease set in as he finally woke from the nightmare Onaveeve had snared him with. "I am sorry. My heart belongs to another." Still, she eased her chest closer to his beating heart. Nothing in the entire cosmos could usher her to stop.
"Humor, a goddess, Eddipus."
She spoke an ancient spell. She knew the words would increase her hold upon his already fogged mind. The dark spell worked well and wormed its way through his skull. As soon as she spoke the words, he threw her down immediately. The spell caught him off guard and created a false feeling. Unconditional love. It was all a disgusting lie that wouldn't loosen its evil grip. So it came to pass that Eddipus fell in love with a witch from the dreaded north. Her chin tilted, her eyes shut tight. But he looked at her. Eddipus gazed at her smile. He looked at the beauty and fairness of his lovely high priestess Hilda, and he wept. No matter how strong her curse, deep in his mind was the memory of his one true love. The creature Nyxith, tired of sitting idle, wanted to tell someone Hilda's secret. She rushed up the tower and into the mind of Onaveeve. She was about to speak the name, about to say it. Nothing would stop her from completing her sinister, greedy quest. Onaveeve said to Eddipus,
"Tell me, I pray thee, who thy true lover is, and I will be yours, bound to you forever."
He gasped, opened his mouth. Onaveeve heard the name like a wind's whisper. His mouth did not move. Eddipus had won the battle, proven himself worthy, and kept his beloved's name in his heart. He rolled off her. "Who said that?" he shouted, reaching for his clothes. "You dare speak her name?" Eddipus looked down at the Vidian still clasped to his tunic. It pulsed bright purple, piercing through the darkness. Every ounce of strength she had mustered to preserve Onaveeve's form dwindled. He saw her. He saw a dark, elven witch.
"It's too late. I know her name now. As given by Nyxith, Hilda will die."
He grabbed the Vidian. He brought it up in the air. and held it tight.
"Who are you, temptress? Tell me now."
The words were loud, and they burned her. She spoke her name in a panic. She tried to bite her words off. She knew his secret, and now he knew hers. To know evil's name is to have dominion over it. He chanted, attempting to expel her away. The Vidian was a powerful conduit. He thought of Priestess Hilda. Valeria began to struggle. He was gaining control.
"You will not have her,"
he shouted. The Vidian's glow brightened. He fought hard. Eddipus was about to grab Talavir with his other hand when Valeria had vanished. Eddipus stared into the Vidian. He was alone. He felt a cold breeze drying his sweat.
"Hilda,"
he cried. The wind blew.
"I'm sorry."
It grew darker. The wind blew once more. He felt transported back with Val, who still sat on the stonework. "I told you," he said in a cold tone.
"The Vidian that Hilda gave me. Her heart. It holds mystical powers, and helped me dispel the temptress. With the aid of her heart, I sent Valeria away."
"She was weak." Val paused. "You were stronger. This was a test, Eddipus. Consider yourself passing the challenge." He stood and patted Oedipus's shoulder. "I would have killed her." Oedipus tied his pack, clasped the Vidian, and began to walk with his boots laced tight. "You received a message while you were gone," Val said. "By not resisting her spell, you've learned. Everyone feels pain." Val walked ahead. "Each of my scars tells a story. I'm no victim." He stopped for a moment, turned, and looked at Eddipus. "And neither are you." They started down a deep, dark pathway until they found a portal opening. There was no way around it. Throwing caution to the wind, both Eddipus and Val leapt through. They found themselves transported to a field closer to their destination. Before long, off in the distance, a wooden cart caught their eye. They walked towards the wagon. That was when they saw cages and 2 large wooden crosses pegged to the backboard.
"Slavers?"
Eddipus spoke. Coming around to the front of the cart, they saw very tall women nailed to the beams. Val sneered, looking at the huge beings. He pointed towards their right hands. 6 fingers.
"And?"
Oedipus questioned. "Rafa, from Gath."
"Rather they become my friend or mortal enemy. It's best to brave a battle with your foe whilst they're awake. Only a coward kills someone in their sleep."
Eddipus wedged Talavir between the nails, wood and Rafa hands. He loosened each one and freed them. Val looked down at the ground, remembering his many battles and kills. Some lives he took, while they slept. What Eddipus said shook him. A few of the Rafa woke. Val was at the ready, arrow in hand. Oedipus smiled, holding one of them in his arms. She opened her eyes. Female Rafa eyes were big and dark. They sparkled like a twilight night, and it was easy to get lost in them. She yawned and grinned.
"Oh my, a big, strapping young warrior."
She reached around Oedipus's neck. She held and caressed underneath his long blonde hair.
"See, Val? Saving lives has its perks."
He laughed, and turned his gaze back to the smiling Rafa. She was so tall, much taller than either Eddipus or Val. Long ago Rafa were in Fandesique in those days. They'd come as merchants and explorers. After a while a war brewed. Both man and elf feared the Rafa for their astonishing power and size. Spies were sent to Gath. When they came back, they described the island. They said it had wondrous fortified cities reaching up to the heavens. The Rapha were a race of magic users who used strange great powers from a growth in the palm of their right hand. Slavers hadn't any use for disobedient slaves. When capturing the tall beings, they'd cut out the polyp of the hand and left it to bleed, healing on its own.
I'm sorry, my lady. I'm tied to someone.
She glanced at Oedipus's chest, at his gleaming Vidian.
But if you are so inclined, go ahead and show my friend over there your appreciation.
Val grimaced as the one Eddipus was holding stood and sauntered over. She towered over him and sat on his knee. Not funny. He glared at Oedipus's bemusement. Another stood and sauntered over to Val, sitting on his left knee. It was like seeing a scared, angry little child, pouting with two gigantuses sitting on his lap. A sight to behold.
Ooh, scars. Where's this one from?
The right Rapha asked, trailing a long fingertip down one of Val's trophies under his chin. He launched his hand forward and grabbed the woman by her wrist. Don't touch me. He stared up at her, scowling. Eddipus laughed at the situation, but Val was hiding something. A rational fear, a distaste, and an anger welling up the longer they stayed. The touch to his scars by the Rapha hurt him more than anyone would know. It wasn't physical pain, but mental. The touch brought back memories he'd rather keep buried. Women are distracting, Val responded to Oedipus's rude laughter. Especially Rapha ones. Eddipus took a deep breath. He lit a fire as he, the Rapha, and Val settled for a few moments.
So, what happened to your boss's caravan?
The slavers didn't think we were good stock. They left us to rot near the mental chasm.
Mental chasm?
Eddipus questioned. Our next stop, warrior Eddipus. When the campfire dimmed, Eddipus separated some supplies for the Rapha who ran for a clearing. They were planning on going back home, to Gath. Oedipus and Val packed up and began to walk. Dawn was breaking, and it wouldn't be long before they would come across the mental chasm. Vinan thought he saw the woman walking in the night, full of grace and of radiant beauty. He smelled a sweet perfume through the breeze. The smell was of flower pollen and elven honeysuckle. He heard a familiar whisper riding the wind, slow, soft, and hypnotic. He waited in a hut on an open chamber balcony. She had seen him every night. It puzzled the prince because she had already told him about Eddipus. Still, he would not reject the priestess's affection. The meeting was gradual. Months passed once Didymus journeyed from Westerian Cardamom, the kingdom of the west. It had been a while since Eddipus left to find the cure. Vinan stood on the veranda. The house was hid beyond the tree line of hilltop. He looked out and saw the closed bazaar with its darkened stalls. He watched the swaying trees, saw the dark homes. The wild curs came out in the night to play, hunt, and howl. The sky seemed darker than anyone would ever have thought normal. The Maiden's Cauldron Inn had dimmed its lights. Vinan's father was asleep as he snuck out and away from Tullius's guardsmen. They would embrace again. But then there was no going back.
This is a mistake,
Vinan thought, as he watched the lady in white walking towards a door below him. she was here. Her scent was all too familiar, yet mysterious. He heard her run up the stairs to the bedchamber as he turned to enter inside.
What about her secret? What about Eddipus? I need to call the whole thing off. I shan't continue this charade.
He saw her enter the room, interrupting his thoughts as she ran up to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. She kissed him and felt his warm lips. The longing was too strong. He wanted to resist, but Hilda held him tight. He traced his fingers down the back of her lengthy, fibrous halter dress.
Kiss me again, Vinan.
Something in her voice shook him. He was not sure what it was, but he found himself losing the battle once again.
Yes, my priestess.
Vinan could not contain his excitement. He already suspected the woman he was embracing was not Hilda. He didn't care. He didn't want to. Didn't like the facts running through his head. He kissed her with a passion the boy had never felt before. Vinan was still probing her spine with his fingers down to the small of her back. He fell silent and backed away. Hilda wandered over to a bed in the middle of the room. She sprawled out on a cot of furs.
Come, Prince.
She teased him with a smile and twitched a finger in a come-hither motion. Vinan walked, but stopped halfway. He watched as she undid the lace around her neck. Her gown slipped down, showing some skin. He stepped closer to her in the bed. His heart quickened. A soft glint caught Vinan's eye in a darker corner of the dusty room. He squinted into a sunbeam that cast its shadow on a high vanity.
I love seeing you stand there, but my prince,
she murmured to him.
Wouldn't you rather be with me over here?
He shuddered. His figure reflected, the bed reflected, and Hilda had cast no figure in the cracked mirror. As quick as he could, Vinan drew his rapier and assumed a defensive stance, awake and alert. Vinan felt helpless, but courageous to a point. Helpless when he saw no shadow on the floor as she stood and strolled. She spoke, and her voice changed as she approached him. Her smirk turned into a look of sadness. Her eyes darkened. Mist swirled around her body. He thrust and flicked the edge of his blade at her arm. Hilda's skin flaked off where he had wounded her. Bone, muscle, and blood streamed through the air from the wound. Everything melted into a smooth blob. The blob disappeared like a heavy bubble.
Prince?
She cried. She walked towards his sword and plunged it through her chest, clean in two. The blade reached behind her as she went to him and gave Vinan a longing, lingering kiss.
My true name is Nyxith. I can take any form you wish.
She glanced down at the blade.
Valeria promised me your soul. Your heart should be mine.
Fading, depressed eyes met his.
You're a changeling, then?
Asked Vinan, already pulling out the blade. Blackness, blood, muscle, and bone poured out of the thin hole from his sword into the air and evaporated. Filled with fear, he watched Nyxith rot and fade off into the winds in clouds of black smoke.
I've loved you from afar for so long,
she gasped and cried, with another line before she left.
I will trouble you no more, my prince,
she said.
Please, find someone who loves you like I do, precious Vinan. I will be around, through the winds.
The last particle, a flake of charred-looking skin, caressed his cheek. She was gone. Vinan stood alone in the rickety shack. Or did he? He found himself in an open field with nothing but twisted trees and withered dead vines.
Before I go, I leave you with this vision, my love.
His hand shook and he began to walk the forest path. He heard a voice. It was distant, and he began to follow the sounds of a man and a woman.
You promised devotion,
the woman asked. Then the other replied in a rough, familiar voice.
Curse me, my queen.
It was the voice of Tullius Didymus. It was Vinan's father. Vinan ran, closer to a clearing. Through a bush he saw a dark, strange, but beautiful woman holding a crown. She was elvish, and stood before a prostrating Didymus. She placed the crown on his head, and he stood. Didymus swayed and balanced on a sword, coughing, sputtering, and wheezing.
Keep your promise. Grant me a wife, my son's charms, and the kingdom in Westirian.
Didymus walked away, but called once more to the witch. With shaky breath, he regained his strength and sheathed his sword.
Thank you for blessing me with the West, Queen Valeria. I won't worry any more about not seeing my son marry before I die.
Die? Die of what?
Thought Vinan. He knew his father had a cough, but dying?
This isn't happening. This is all a cursed, horrible dream. Why did you lie to me, father?
It's all true. It is part of Valeria's scheme. Collect loyal followers through welcoming gifts. Some of them have a catch. She promised me you, but only after I found who Eddipus's true lover was. That way, she could kill Hilda. I see now that having you would only bring me pain and push you away. Nyxith paused. She wants to tear apart the alliance between elf and man. She wants Eddipus, and will destroy Hilda to do it. Nyxith soared through the winds, his fists clenched.
She will not kill Hilda!
Prince?
Nyxith grew concerned. For a moment, everything was dark. Vinan was outside, back in the elven village, on the veranda. He felt a light, sweet kiss from the air on his cheek, containing a bare hint of sadness. As he looked towards the Maiden's Cauldron Inn, he became angry at his loving father. He became enraged at Valeria, enraged at his own failure to allow Nyxith to use him.
She's not going to kill Hilda. I'll run Valeria through first.
A sensation of anger, hatred, revenge, and contempt manifested in his heart. As he left the shack and walked to the Maiden's Cauldron Inn, he thought,
I would have words with the Westirian king.
Val and Eddipus walked, the skies darkening. The forest was silent. Val looked ahead, focusing on a large and cavernous rock pit. He pointed towards the area and began wandering to the deep chasm, a look of confidence, assurance, and focus on his face. Eddipus followed, not sure what to expect. The pit was dark and sharp, winding in ragged, craggy circles, a giant of a chasm. They were standing, staring into the descending black maw as Val spoke.
Down with you.
Eddipus peered at Val, a look of fear and terror on his face. He was shaking. Val looked at him sternly, hood still down over his broad shoulders. He pointed down. Eddipus looked back at the pit and sighed, not knowing his fate if he would begin the climb.
This is a part of my journey, isn't it?
Val nodded.
I guess I'm climbing down there, then. I'll be back as soon as possible.
I'll be waiting.
He turned and began the climb. Eddipus reached for his sword, not before Val swiped it. He looked at warrior Eddipus, who was dangling off the edge, with a curious, questioning grimace. Val chuckled at him quietly, cleaning Talavir.
No physical weapons.
Can I take my Vidian?
It's important that you do.
Eddipus struggled to stay hanging off the ledge.
What about my pack? What if I need to defend myself?
No. Dante says all you need are your mental faculties.
Eddipus began the climb down, disappearing into the darkness. Eddipus descended, not seeing any sight of the ground, his back arched and his hands tensed against the rocky foundation. After some time, he reached the bottom of the pit and looked up. He was breathing heavily, his legs burnt from the exercise. He saw no opening at the top, no light, not even a simple god ray glinting down. He looked around, searching for any sign of a way up. He found desolation. He looked towards the center ground, seeing a man in green hooded hunting clothes. He walked towards the tall figure and saw that it was Val, standing firmly. Eddipus looked at him acquisitively, wondering how Val climbed down so quickly. Val looked at Eddipus, his eyes squinted.
What are you doing?
I'm here because you told me to climb, Eddipus responded.
Put it down! You'll hurt yourself!
Val wasn't looking at Eddipus. His eyes were cold and gazed through him.
You can't kill me!
Val gasped, gurgling blood, falling before him, dead on the ground. The body had a sword sticking from it. It was Talavia. Before Eddipus could react, Val vanished, and so did the weapon. Eddipus looked up, his heart pounding. He looked around, his eyes searching for any sign of Val. He looked back and didn't want to believe his companion was dead. He looked down where the body had been, instinctively saddened.
I'm sorry,
he whispered. The ground shook, and there was a loud, thundering thudding in the air. He looked up, seeing tall, smooth, skin-colored trees. Not trees, but long, shapely legs. She was towering over him and stopped inches away from Eddipus. It was a giantess. It was Hilda.
You wretch!
She bellowed out. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with malice and anger. Hilda! Eddipus cried out. She brought her foot up, brought it down, and tried to stomp on him. Quickly, he leapt onto her foot, grabbing her ankle with clawed fists. She screamed out, shaking her foot violently. Eddipus banged his fist, but it was no use. She pulled Eddipus away by his neck and flung him. He yelled and skidded to the ground. Gaining his strength, Eddipus stood and ran. Thudding slowly behind him were stomping feet of the gargantuan Hilda. Eddipus felt fear coursing through his veins, but not because of the giantess. The fear was deep, like a wound that couldn't be healed. He had been taken advantage of by Valeria, and because of that, he was afraid of losing Hilda forever if she had found out. He blamed himself. Cursed or not, violated or not, he felt the hurt, the pain, and knew he couldn't escape the truth. He ran and ran, his heart pounding, her legs thumping. His breathing and heartbeat were very heavy and burdened to be. He saw absolutely nothing ahead, but knew there had to be a rock wall in front of him somewhere. He looked back, seeing the giant coming. Eddipus looked forward and up, a wall of stone standing fairly tall in front of him. In fear, he turned to face her, his back against the obstruction. Hilda stopped. She looked down at him.
I'm leaving you!
I'm sorry! I'm so sorry!
Eddipus whimpered.
Please, forgive me.
His tears began to fall. He was afraid, not of death, but of losing her love forever. The Vidian latched to his vest glowed brightly.
I love you,
he cried out, looking up at her. She looked down at his Vidian. Her eyes turned from hatred to gentleness and sorrow.
I'm sorry,
Eddipus breathed a sigh. She turned and walked away. He could clearly hear the woman crying as she slowly stomped off into the distant dark, shaking the ground and fading away. Eddipus turned to find the spiraling rock wall had reappeared, replacing the wall of stone. He grasped the first embedded rock and was about to climb, but he heard a soft, sweet voice.
Wait, Eddipus, before you go.
He turned to see a regular-sized Hilda. She ran to him, quickly wrapped her arms around him, and kissed him.
"Oh, I've missed you,"
he cried.
I miss you too. Listen, there's nothing to forgive,
she said softly.
You were tested, my love. The key was that you approached the false goddess as she was, in her totality. You found her true identity, dominating her. You used my vision and your talents to deceive her. The kindness of heart and power of true love requires respect and understanding. I love you.
She began to cry as she slowly faded, tears falling from the corners of her beautiful eyes.
Now return to me, my Eddipus, for you have conquered your fears.
And like that, she was gone. Her voice echoed and faded away. With pure confidence, strength, and a new mindset, Eddipus began his climb. King Didymus Tullius woke up, his heart beating fast in his chest. He felt the heat from the fireplace. He looked out a window, almost sunrise, and he had awoken suddenly. Didymus had heard the angry slam of a door and a young voice yelling hysterically, very fiercely, and close to bitter, blinded, fierce rage. Thinking it could be his son, Prince Vinan, he jumped from the side of his bed, making his way to the boy's voice. Coughing into his cloth, he closed his robe up, turned a corner, and opened a door to Vinan's bedchamber at the end, cool air escaping the room and brushing across his skin. Opening the door, he felt hesitant and went in despite the uneasy feeling in his aching gut. He coughed into his handkerchief again. Nothing came up, and so he walked further in. He grabbed a nearby candle. "Vinan?" he called out in the dark of a small room, which seemed colder than usual and extremely lackluster of liveliness, and smelt of bitter sweet.
Father?
Vinan said, his voice cold and very quiet. "Vinan?" Didymus responded.
Good morning, Father.
Vinan was too calm.
I'm here, my son.
Didymus said, his voice strained.
What is the meaning of this? What's all the commotion?
Father, you are sick.
Pardon me?
Didymus said, his heart breaking.
Father, you're sick, I know. Why did you lie?
Vinan raised his voice.
I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about, boy.
Didymus said, his fear building.
How could you even know?
You're sick with a curse, the curse of a witch.
I'm cursed.
Didymus gave in, feeling defeated.
It's true.
He sat onto a nearby chair, coughing a little more onto his cloth.
You were never meant to know the truth, my dear, sweet child. I did it because I loved you. I made a promise to you long ago that I would be there to see you walk down the aisle. And by God, I would! So, in my foolishness, I sought out the elven witch of the north, Valeria. I asked her for a rule so that you wouldn't grow up impoverished. And I asked her to grant you with charms so that you could have your pick of any maiden in the lands. She granted me this request.
Vinan walked forward from a dark corner of the room. He was ready to listen now.
But there was a catch, wasn't there?
Sadly, yes. It was a curse, and a deadly one, that would have taken me after you were wed.
Didymus's voice was fading. His skin was pale, and it was clearly getting hard for him to breathe. Vinan's anger faded from his face and turned to a pale shock. He felt sadness and regret as he ran to Didymus and hugged his father.
What have?
Yes. Didymus felt cold to Vinan. There were two conditions to the blessing. First, I had to show obedience to her, and secondly... He paused for a moment. And second, you weren't supposed to know the truth. Didymus's breath was faint against his son's cheek.
I'm sorry, Father.
No. I'm sorry, Vinan. It was a burden you weren't meant to carry. I'm bad at lying. Now you know. Just let me go. You're free to rule Wisterian and Cardamon as High King. He dropped the candle whose flame had died out and blinked, smiling at Vinan. I love you, son.
Please don't leave me.
Let me go. My soul was in prison, but now I'm free.
I love you too, Father. I love you.
Vinan listened to his father's final wheezing, strained breath. Didymus went limp in Vinan's arms, his head cocked to one side, eyes glassy white. It was at this point Vinan was alone, his thoughts distant until he finally came to the realization of what had just happened. His father was truly gone, and Vinan wept. Over the crackle sound of Sister Letha's hut's blazing hearth, Priestess Hilda glanced over at the door, vibrating off a violent knocking from the other side. Hilda was certain Lisa would answer it, but she wasn't seen anywhere. With one hand gripping the bed railing, she pulled herself up from the cot and took a quick look. Instinctively, the tension in her muscles increased as her promise of protection for Lisa seemed to have failed. When the knocking stopped, she tossed an animal fur and stood to walk to the entrance across the creaky floor. With a long, deep breath, she calmly clasped the handle, unlatched the door, and opened it in shock. Vinan! She gasped. The prince, standing outside shivering, began crying.
I'm sorry for disturbing you, my lady. My father's dead.
What? Come in, young prince. She motioned, staring at him with concerned bewilderment. He walked in carefully, his eyes puffy and red from sobbing in the cold, dark night. With open arms, he quickly hugged the priestess.
We can't stay here, Hilda.
He backed away, rubbing his eyes.
A witch, Valeria, killed my father. She's after you, and I'm going to kill her.
He pulled his rapier and thrust it forward into the air in a vow of vengeance. Wiping the tears from his eyes with his left sleeve, Vinan proceeded to sheathe his blade in one rapid motion. As he turned to walk away from her, Hilda grabbed his wrist and stopped him. The sun finally showed, drying the rest of his wrathful tears. He shook his head as he pulled away from her. For once, Vinan broke from his shell. He had a purpose. He wanted to kill Valeria, and any who followed the vile villain.
I have to confess that I've been taking advantage of you,
he said. Just as he turned to face her again, he felt ashamed and unworthy. Hilda was mildly perplexed and answered, weary but firm. What could you possibly mean, Vinan?
She's Nyxith,
Vinan said through gritted teeth.
I've been seeing her nightly.
You can meet with whoever, she responded, looking down at the boy. You are not tied to me. You know who is. Disheartened, he spoke.
Nyxith, is a shapeless changeling.
She's what? Stepping further into the hut, he felt the warm fire. He wanted some comfort, but felt none. He gazed at the sparkling hearth in the center room floor. Approaching a wicker seat, he sat and began to explain the events of the past few months. When he reached the end, he stared at Hilda and waited for an answer with fear. The story backdrop was hard to accept for Hilda, but she understood. She forgave him and was angry.